China's property crisis is worse than we think. Now, let me start this video by saying that I do not endorse the China is going to disappear hysterics that Peter Zeihan keeps trumpeting all over the internet and especially to neoconservatives. I think that China is facing some serious challenges economically, and the information war being conducted by state-supported media narratives in China and the US is not really giving us a clear picture of what is going on. If you like this kind of video, please help this channel out by liking this video and subscribing. I do have a Patreon account focused on rational discussion and sharing of information by reasonable people, which is a rarity on the internet these days. I like data. That is how we tell with some degree of accuracy how healthy an economy actually is, and data is how businesses and policymakers prepare for the future. While economic news coming from Chinese sources has always been something that I look at with a bit more skepticism, slowly, over the last 4 years, the data that is provided has become much less clear and in some cases has simply disappeared and is no longer reported. The logical conclusion is that China has something to hide. The property crisis in China from the outside over the last really 8 years, not just the last 4 years, has looked like an orderly unraveling of powerful real estate investment companies that got in over their heads by a competent governing authority. The narrative being projected has been one that blames individual company executives for failure of leadership and irresponsible risk-taking, all couched in the suggestion that the crisis is contained to these companies and will not affect the wider economy. The truth, my friends, is messier and a lot uglier. China's crisis isn't entirely dissimilar to the subprime mortgage fiasco of 2008. It isn't a few nefarious players who need to have their hands slapped. It is a systematic failure of due diligence and regulation. But unlike in the West, it is a failure that due to a variety of cultural reasons will be very hard to correct if it is even possible to correct. If you were to judge the health of the Chinese economy by China's official statistics, the nation's housing market has been remarkably resilient in the face of economic challenges and record defaults by developers. New home prices, according to official statistics, have only slipped 2.4% from their highs in August of 2021, while those for existing homes have dropped about 6%. From just these data points, the crisis looks entirely manageable. The problem I have with this data is that no reasonable observer could actually trust this data. Unlike in many parts of the world, China's authorities do not publicly disclose home prices after the transaction settles. I have no idea how this data is collected or how they arrive at these numbers. Economists who look at this information every day don't know how they got these numbers. The CCP's data collection methodology is a complete mystery, despite the fact that it is published. The availability of timely and accurate economic data in China has always been a concern, but has become a crisis in itself since Chinese President Xi Jinping consolidated power a few years ago and basically eliminated anyone who might tell him something that he doesn't like. He has surrounded himself with yes men, and even went so far as to have his political predecessor, Hu Jintao, publicly escorted away from the Communist Party Congress by his staff. Under Xi, China has become more authoritarian. Authoritarianism in the modern era is just simply almost always a signal of coming economic stagnation. Under Xi, access to economic data has become increasingly restricted. The CCP has stopped reporting some key economic data. The National Bureau of Statistics stopped releasing youth unemployment numbers, for example, after youth unemployment among 16 to 24-year-olds spiked to 21% in June. As late as August 2023, economists were instructed by party officials not to discuss deflation or faltering growth. Under the government of President Xi Jinping, information has become so restricted, I have to question whether Chinese policymakers themselves have an accurate understanding of the economy. China's strategy for managing its struggling economy appears to be just hide the crappy data and pretend like everything's okay. When it comes to the housing crisis in China, we only have the barest understanding of how the data is collected. We know from their published methodology that they rely on part, at least on surveys rather than price data from transactions, since that information is not publicly disclosed. Supposedly, this helps authorities to smooth data trends and to avoid large swings. This is very different from methodologies in the United States. The widely cited S&P Case-Shiller Index is first of all produced by a private company that has an economic interest in producing accurate data. If their data is not accurate, people will stop using them as a data resource. The company is also not a government looking to promote a particular narrative. S&P's methodology is entirely transparent. I'll include a link in the description to their methodology, along with links to other sources quoted in this video. S&P uses home price data collected at local deed recording offices across the country to get their figures. Accurate information is really important if you're a policymaker in China looking to solve some serious economic issues. The CCP, like the United States government, is an interventionist government and has an interventionist philosophy when it comes to economic crises. Just like the US, they devise measures to prop up demand and ensure liquidity in markets. In China, it's going to be really difficult to enforce an economic policy that is out of line with official statistics. There is, however, a new burgeoning economic data industry in China, derived from property agents and private data providers. They paint a picture that is much more dire. Figures show that existing home prices fell at least 15% in prime neighborhoods of major cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen. For example, in Hangzhou, close to where Alibaba is headquartered, home prices in some neighborhoods are down 25 to 28% according to agents. In Lianyang, a popular area with expats and financiers in Shanghai, residential prices slid 15 to 20% from mid-2021. Prices of existing homes in at least 5 popular districts of Shenzhen have slumped 15% in the past 3 years, according to a July report by a private research institute. This isn't just a local phenomenon either. More than half of Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities saw existing home prices fall by more than 15%. This is a full-blown crisis for the property market in China, and possibly a crisis of confidence in the CCP itself for its poor management of the economy since Xi Jinping came to power. History will likely see him as one of the least effective leaders of modern China. Upon assuming power, he was handed a healthy and growing economy. Under Xi's leadership, that economic miracle has crumbled. The immediate danger that the property market in China faces is a deflationary cycle as home buyers sit on the sidelines waiting for home prices to decline even further before making a purchase. This is bad for an economy in many ways, and a deflationary cycle is likely to affect the whole economy, not just the property market. The immediate situation is not hopeless, however. While the US tends to tighten loan-to-value limits or change interest rates to affect lending ability, China can go beyond this as they have a vast array of policy levers to pull. The CCP in the past has been known to ban anyone not born in a particular city from purchasing homes or limiting the number of properties that a person is allowed to own. And unlike the US, the Chinese government intervenes on prices directly. Also, as most new homes in China are sold before they're built, this is another source of market distortion that comes from regulatory ceilings on those projects. Through something called presales permits, local housing authorities set home prices that developers intend to sell properties for. This policy has been distorting markets since 2016. The approach initially successfully kept new home prices in the biggest cities largely flat after a giant home buying frenzy. At the same time, existing home values continued to soar, which is odd for any real estate market. When prices began falling, the policy helped to make new residences decline less, despite the severe slowdown. But now it's distorting markets, and what that means for the future of home values for Chinese homeowners and investors is unclear. A real estate market where the accuracy of information isn't trusted at all may hold back some buyers and could mean future policy responses are in reality completely uninformed by data. So here's what I expect to happen next. The CCP is going to be forced into some dramatically interventionist policies, and all of that is going to cost money. In the past, the National Chinese Communist Party has designated most economic troubles as local issues, not because local governments actually have that much power or that much to do with policy, but rather they have done this to push off the cost of intervention and economic development to local governments. In part, this is done so that the national government can keep its debt burden, and most importantly, its debt to GDP ratio dramatically lower than Western countries. This makes investment look very attractive and keeps interest rates on sovereign debt very low. This will not be possible this time around. Local governments are simply mortgaged to the hilt. China's GDP is also probably dramatically smaller than we think. Numbers as high as 60% smaller have been floating around, although I don't really believe that. It appears, however, that the CCP has been overcounting population and overestimating GDP growth for decades. What comes next for China is a dramatic economic intervention whose costs will be absorbed by the national government, which will result in a large increase in the debt to GDP ratio. Combine that with stagnating economic growth, a declining population, stagnating productivity per capita, and the largest and fastest increase in labor expenses in all of human history, reshoring of industries back home or to third countries, geopolitical uncertainties, and a lack of some critical resources. This leads to a conclusion counter to the one that we've been essentially brainwashed to accept, that China is on the rise and will be the world's economic superpower, surpassing the United States in all things. I think that is far from reality. Now, I have huge respect for the resilience, creativity, business acumen, and hard work of the Chinese people. But just like people all over the world, their leaders failed them, and the people are going to pay the price. I don't think that this means collapse for China like Peter Zeihan does, but I do think that it means that China, despite some huge successes here and there, fails to realize its economic ambitions and fails to achieve what most knowledgeable people in the West expected, which was that China would surpass the United States and become the world's most preeminent economy. I think that Xi Jinping's mismanagement has ruined any chance of that occurring in my lifetime. Thanks for watching the video today. Please check out my Patreon link in the description and be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.